Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I hope it's been a great week for everyone so far. Yesterday, this was where we stopped. We had talked about product backlog. And so what I said about the product backlog is that usually as your requirement list begins to grow, you start out small just based on what you know from the meetings you'll be having with your stakeholders, right? And then that list will continue to grow. And as you get more requirements where you've documented it, you've validated it with the business, what you understand that they're asking for is what they're actually asking for. And that is the purpose of you validating it, right? The fact that you went into that meeting and they told you doesn't mean you're going to take that to be a requirement. You're going to document it the way that you understand it, and then you take it back to them to say, was this what you meant? And they may say, oh, actually, almost, except you need to change one, two, three. Or they'll say, oh, you totally nailed it. It's all good. That is what we're looking for, right? And as that requirement list continues to grow, you put it in what we call a project backlog. Again, your project backlog will depend on your company. Some companies that don't have tools may document all of their requirements in SharePoint. A lot of companies use a tool called Jira. You create your project backlog in there. You or the PM would create it, or someone on the project team, but typically it's the PM and the BA, and you put all of those requirements in there, and the requirements will continue to grow over, the lifetime of the project. However, remember, we do not build from the project backlog. So as a team, we're going to talk about our Scrum ceremonies later, but just know that as a team, you're going to be meeting maybe every other week, and you'll be looking at the project backlog. And as a team together, you're going to decide on the requirement that you want to pull from the project backlog into the sprint backlog. It is from the sprint backlog, the requirements in the sprint backlog, that the whoever is building the system will pick from and build. Okay, so that was me just reiterating what we talked about yesterday. Before we get into the details of MVP, someone asked a question yesterday about an interview where they had asked if they brought you onto a project where the requirement has been done, and so basically maybe you're not gathering the requirements from scratch. So I was giving I responded to that by saying the way that I understood it would be like when you bring in a professional company to help you with an implementation. So I gave the example of Deloitte. The other part of that, we were running out of time yesterday, so I wanted to say the other part of my answer is that if you find yourself in that situation as a BA where there is already a requirement document, whether you contributed to it or not does not really matter. The point being, there is a requirement document and your team is not doing the building. That can happen, right? We established that yesterday. So if that happens, why did they hire you? What exactly are you doing there? Because now they're going to be paying Deloitte and they're going to be paying the in-house project team. One of the reasons why that happens is that those two teams work, they complement one another. So you're bringing in the types of Deloitte for their expertise. Chances are you're doing that because you do not have the expertise in-house, right? But usually they would have a BA in-house because remember, requirements evolve, especially in an agile environment, right? And secondly, we don't wait till we're done gathering requirements before we start building. If your company is using agile methodology, meaning as Deloitte is building, you, the BA, you're still working with the business, right? You're tying up loose ends, you're trying your best to understand whatever outstanding requirements have not been built. And so you are still that go-between, right? Because you have on one side, you have your company, and on the other side, you have Deloitte. Usually, they're not going to ask Deloitte to go talk to the marketing manager. Who's going to do that talking? It would be you. And that's why I keep mentioning the fact that as a BA, oftentimes you're playing the role of an intermediary. Intermediary between, or the go-between, between the business, your company, and, well, between your business stakeholders and your technical team, right? Sometimes you're the middleman between your company and the professional, like the Deloitte. But you're usually in the middle of two parties or two people. And that's something you need to get comfortable with. People ask me all the time, oh, how technical do I need to be as a BA? I mean, technical is good because it would help you have some really intelligent conversations, right? But the most successful BAs that I know, it is not their technical skill that stands them out. It is their ability to play that middleman efficiently that both parties actually like to talk to them. That is one skill you really, really want to work on. If you already have it down, fantastic. If it is work in progress, keep refining it. When you hear they're paying a BA $120 an hour, which technically is 240,000 a year for one job, it's not for the technical skill, usually. So I'll never say 100%, right? But it is that soft skill, okay? That ability to hold conversations and people actually want to listen to you. You're talking to people and it is making sense to them. And even if it's not making sense to them, the way you go about saying it, they just want to listen. They see you every time they think about you, all that comes to mind is Abiola brings value. She will not come spend 1 hour talking to me without showing me the value to be derived. Okay. So, as that middle person, just always remember every meeting I go to, I may not be delivering the value immediately, but this conversation is going to lead to somebody, you know, getting some value. Okay. So again, I'm not downplaying anybody's technical skill. I myself know a bit about technical stuff. If you know what I mean, I've worked with so many tools, right? Applications, and I'm talking enterprise applications, right? From let me not even start counting some of the solutions that I've worked on. But I know that when government agencies hire me today, it is not because I have these applications on my resume, no doubt about it. But that is not why they're choosing me over the next person because the next person knows the application too. I mean, you just learn Salesforce, right? In your class alone, how many people are there? So why would they hire you for your Salesforce knowledge over the other person? They know what you know. The way you differentiate yourself is through your own person. Find your style and really, really make it work for you. I don't know why I said that, but I hope that, that stuck with somebody and they get the gist of what it is I'm saying here. So anyway, let's dive into MVP. So in a nutshell, MVP is the simplest solution that could work. Okay? Simplest solution that could work. So your customer needs a car to be able to move from point A to point B. You could give them a Toyota Corolla or you could try to build a Ferrari. What has your customer asked for? Does your customer actually need a Ferrari to get from point A to point B? Maybe they do, because the kind of people they're going to meet in point B, if you don't come in a Ferrari, you're not even going to gain entrance, right? I know that is a non-IT solution, but it's really just to help you understand what we're talking about here. What is the minimum that would work? There are many extras that would be great to have, right? But what must we deliver for this to be useful? For this solution to be useful to the marketing department, what functionality must they have? Okay? So basically, as the PowerPoint says, the goal is to get a simple version of the solution, get it into the hands of the people. They're using it, they're giving you feedback. How do you determine the functionality that will go in there? Like I said, the must-have, the high priority functionality is what you want to build first. How would you determine the high priority functionality? By talking to the business. If you have a conversation with them and they say, oh, we have these 20 user stories and they're all so important, and if you don't deliver them, we're all going to not be able to work and all of that. And then you tell them something along these lines, not in my exact words, right? To say, if we had time to deliver only 10 of the 20, can you tell me the 10? Immediately gets them thinking, okay, so if they could deliver only 10, of course, they're going to select the 10 most important ones, right? If there is a time constraint. Okay. So again, the general idea of the MVP is not to build a shabby solution and say, oh, don't worry, we'll perfect it later. No, the MVP still has to work. It still needs to meet their need. They need to have all the functionality that they need in that MVP. They're not going to have the extras. Like in the MVP, for example, you may build one way of doing something, But in the future, you may build two other ways, giving time and money, right? Now, you cannot build the MVP and not give them at least one way of achieving that task. But in the MVP, we may not give them option two, option three of a way for them to achieve the task. So, in case somebody is wondering, so how will I know what is MVP? Well, you will work with the business because it is not for you as the BA to know what the MVP is on your own. You are not the business. You are not the marketing department. You are not the one who would know the best way for them to do their business. The way you'd know is by talking to them and asking them about it. Okay, so let's talk about your Scrum team, right? Again, so I've mentioned Scrum in at least most, if not all, of the classes that we've had, right? And that is the team where you're a part of the team. Project manager is a part of the team. If you have developers, maybe Salesforce admin, you have QA, you're all a part of that technical team, right? And so you form the Scrum team. Basically, think about it as the project team. Okay. So a Scrum team would hold an activity we call the daily Scrum. The daily Scrum is a very short meeting where people talk about three things really. What did you work on yesterday? What do you plan on working on today? And are there any obstacles in your way that somebody can help you resolve? So usually the person doing the, resolving of the issues would be the scrum master if you have one. If you don't have a scrum master, typically the project manager. So during that meeting, which may last 10 to 15 minutes, it really shouldn't last long. In fact, people say that scrum meetings are held with people standing up so they don't get too comfortable and start chatting on end, right? So it's a short meeting. Everybody comes prepared to answer the three questions that we have in here. It holds every day, basically. Okay. The Scrum Master, who's the Scrum Master? That is the person who facilitates the Scrum. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes I've worked, at a company where we didn't have a Scrum Master, but we had daily Scrum and the project manager facilitated it. And when the project manager was away, I took over and I was the BA. I was not a Scrum Master, neither was I a project manager on that project. Okay, so the Scrum Master is checking to see, is everybody doing okay on the team? Is there any issue that I can help them with? Maybe the B has been trying to get a meeting with this person and the person just declines every meeting invite. The B has tried everything possible, still not working. Let your Scrum Master know. Okay. I talked about the sprint, which is a time boxed period during which a selection of requirements is implemented. Okay, so the sprint is usually 2 to 4 weeks, usually more 2 than 4. Virtually all the sprints I've gone to is 2 weeks, but it can be more than 2, it can be 3, it can be 4. It's a time box period, has a start date, has an end date, and within that defined period, we're going to work on the user stories or the requirements that we selected into the sprint backlog. So remember, we have the product backlog and we have the sprint backlog. So let's say we're planning for sprint 2, which will begin October 1 to October 15. Around the last week of September, we're going to have our sprint planning meeting. And I think that is my next slide. In case you're wondering, so at what point do we have that conversation about what we're going to do in the sprint? You need to have that conversation before the sprint happens. So you're going to plan for the sprint. However, here we're talking about the sprint itself. So during the sprint, you can remove user stories from the sprint scope, right? So let's say you've agreed to work on 5 user stories in that sprint. You've moved them from the sprint backlog from the product backlog into the sprint backlog. You can return a story and say, no, actually, we can only do 4. Okay, but you cannot pull a new story from the product backlog into the sprint backlog once the sprint has started. The reason is that we don't want to throw people off, right? We need stability. Your developers, your admins, whoever is doing the work, they need to be able to focus on the work without things moving around. Okay? Every sprint has a sprint goal, and the sprint goal is basically what are we seeking to achieve in this sprint? What is the what is the overall goal of the sprint? By the time we're done this sprint, what part of the solution would we have built? Okay. The sprint goal is team effort, basically. Oftentimes includes the product owner as well, the entire project team. We agree on what the sprint means to us and what is the goal we're seeking to achieve. So we've talked about the sprint backlog. Okay. The sprint backlog is derived from the product backlog. So this composes of the sprint goal, which I just talked about, the set of product backlog items selected for the sprint, that's the what, and a plan for how we intend to deliver it. So we don't just select the stories. We need to have a conversation. Okay, these stories we've selected, how are we going to build it? We build 2 and we build 3. Abiola is going to build 2, Mobile is going to build 4, and all of, like, we have an actual plan of how we intend to tackle it. The sprint backlog is visible, right? Everybody in the project team can go view it and say, this is where we're at. Of the 5 user stories, developer 1 has selected 1, developer 2 has selected 2, developer 3 selected 3. When you go into the sprint backlog, it is transparent. Everybody can see what is going on. Okay, you're not necessarily going to see anything the BA is doing if you go into the sprint backlog, because remember that the BA is sort of working ahead. BA is working on something and then gives it to the project team to work on, and then the BA picks something else and they're working, right? So as the BA, they're going to look in the product backlog. They can't necessarily see whatever it is you're working on, and that is okay. It's not like anybody's tracking your work by looking at the sprint backlog, okay? I talked about the sprint planning meeting. So the sprint planning meeting happens at the beginning of each sprint. So basically, even before the sprint begins, it could be maybe a few days before the sprint begins. The team decides on what they're going to be delivering in that sprint. So again, usually the entire project team would be in the sprint planning meeting. Sometimes you may invite a subject matter expert. So maybe like the marketing manager. Say you're trying to understand the sequence of things, right? And you need to build based on the sequence. If nobody has that knowledge in your team, you can invite a stakeholder to come share their expertise with you. Okay? So in the sprint planning meeting, the product owner, if there is one, right, will describe the highest priority features. Okay, of this 20 requirements that we're looking at, number 10 is actually the highest priority one. Then developers will have a conversation about it. Oh, this is complicated. Oh, we can't build this yet because there's a dependency, that we need to look into. Oh, we can build this one just based on what they know. They have a conversation about it. Then remember that at this point, the user stories are not in the sprint backlog yet. They're all in the product backlog. Then once they've discussed and agreed, they will select user stories from the product backlog into the sprint backlog. The development team will then commit to the sprint. We all discussed and we all agreed and we're pulling these 5 user stories. Okay, we are committed to it. At that point, they define the sprint goal. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a short description of what the team plans to achieve during that sprint. So all of this happens during the sprint planning meeting. This is just a diagram you can look at later. Now, see the Scrum, the sprint planning meeting, and even the sprint review meeting that I'm showing you right now, they're called Scrum ceremonies. Okay? They're all called Scrum ceremonies. So if somebody just says, oh, something about Scrum ceremony, at least now you have an idea what they're talking about. The next question in your mind will be, oh, which of these ceremonies are they talking about? But the sprint planning meeting is a ceremony. Sprint review meeting is a ceremony. The Scrum itself is a ceremony. Okay, in the sprint review meeting is held at the end of the sprint. So the sprint planning meeting is at the beginning of the meeting, at the beginning of the sprint, or before, slightly before, shortly before the beginning of the sprint, while the sprint review meeting happens at the end of the sprint. And why do we have this meeting? What do we do there? We evaluate our success against the goal. Now, remember we had a goal when we had the sprint planning meeting. Now we want to see, did we hit the goal? Okay. This is also the meeting where the team will demonstrate the completed stories to the product owner. If it can be demonstrated, right? If it can be demonstrated, they can demonstrate it to the product owner at the sprint review meeting. I know the ceremonies are kind of piling up, but you will see the end to end once I go through them. Then we have what we call the sprint retrospective. What is the sprint retrospective and when does it happen? It happens at the end of the sprint. But the way it differs from the sprint review meeting is that the sprint review meeting is looking at the sprint, the success of the sprint, whereas the sprint retrospective is looking at the team. How is the team doing? Put the sprint aside for a second. If there's no team, there's no sprint. So as much as we care about how the sprint went, we care about how the people are doing. And that's what we're looking at in the sprint retrospective. What went well? What did not go well? How can we work together better? So if you look at the note down here, sprint review is about the product, what we're building, while the sprint retrospective is about the team. Both of them matter. Understand the purpose of both of them. So when they invite you to a sprint retrospective, know what they want to talk about. They're not talking about the product and your requirements. They are talking about the team. How well did the team work together in that 2-week period? Okay. So now we're going to story point. Story point is another popular, term in Scrum methodology or Agile way of doing projects. What is story point? It's a way of estimating the size of a user story. User stories are not the same size. Okay, so why is the size of a user story relevant? It is relevant because when we start deciding on how many stories we're going to pull into the sprint, let's imagine that we have a total of 20 user stories and we pull 5 into our sprint backlog. But those 5 user stories are so complicated, or no, let's start with the easy. They're very easy, right? So we finished them in 2 weeks, and that made us feel that for the next sprint, we can just choose another 5. But this time around, we choose 5, and 4 of those 5, they're so complicated. In fact, so in this next sprint where we chose 5, each of those user stories will take as much time as it took to build the entire 5 you had in sprint 1. So you can see why it's important for us to know the level of complexity of a user story. A user story that has to do with calculation will be a whole lot more complicated than a user story that has to do with logging. And so that's why we try to measure the size of user stories. It will help the team determine how much work to pull into a sprint. So they might have pulled 5 user stories into sprint 1, but because of the size of the rest of the stories, they may pull just 2 into sprint 2 because the size of those 2 combined is even more than the size of the 5 they did in the other sprint. Okay? So I hope everyone is following. Okay. Point 2, by adding up the number of story points, the team can establish its velocity or pace for future iteration. What does that mean? So in sprint 1, now that we have an idea of, how to measure our user stories, we pulled 3 user stories into the sprint and we were able to deliver on the 3. And then in the next sprint, let's say in sprint 1, we pulled 5 and we delivered on all 5. And then in the next sprint, we pulled another 5, but we got through just 4. And then in the next sprint 3, we pulled another 5, right? And we delivered on just 4. The reality is our velocity, which is really the speed at which we're moving, is more likely 4 than 5. Okay? But if we don't measure the stories, like if we don't have a sizing for the stories, we're just going to be going by the number. The point here is you cannot go by just the number of the stories, right? Oh, 5 user stories. 5 user stories today does not necessarily mean, will not always mean 5 user stories in the future. It boils down to the size of the story. And that is why we need to measure the size of the story. And the size is usually related to the level of complexity. We'll look at a few examples of story point estimation in a bit, okay? Story point is done collectively. Usually as a BA, my recommendation is when they're measuring stories, just sit back and watch. Because again, like I always say, if you're not the one building it, don't say, oh, that will take 1 day. Because the person building it might actually feel insulted. They are technical. They know this will take 3 days. You've just said loudly to everyone, oh, that shouldn't take more than 1 day. Now, turn the tables around. How would you feel? You are just about to say this will take 3 days, and then somebody says it will take 1 day. Now you don't feel very confident to say 3 days, right? Yes, if you don't speak up to say 3 days and they estimate it to be 1 day and you don't finish it in 1 day, you'd look like a slacker. So if you're not the one building it, you might have an opinion, but just sit back and watch for a second. Now, let's say that based on your experience, you know that this will take just 1 day, right? And then somebody is saying, oh, it will take me 5 days. Rather than just come out and say, no, that won't take 5 days. No way. It will take not just 1 day. Ask questions and say, oh, is this user story complicated? Can you tell me a bit about why you think it will take 5 days? Something along those lines so that the person doesn't feel attacked, right? That, oh, maybe they just can't really deliver as they should be able to. But the general rule is, unless you're the one building it, do not estimate, okay? Anyway, that's that. At the end of the iteration, the team counts the number of story points they completed, and then they use this to plan for the future. If we think we could do 10 and we did 5, well, next sprint, we're not going to select 10, right? Chances are we select something closer to 5. So let's look at some examples of story point estimation. What it will be for your company, I do not know. You will find out when you get there. These are just examples, right? Maybe your company may even come up with one of their own. But the idea here is understand the concept of it. Which story point it is not as relevant as understanding the concept of story point estimation. Okay? So one estimation is called planning poker. Okay? What happens here is they give everybody on the team a set of cards, right? And all of those cards have different numbers written on it. The Scrum Master or the project manager will read out a user story, and everybody would raise the card with the number that, in their opinion, is what accurately shows the size of that story, right? If there are 5 people in the room and everybody has a card or a set of cards and they read the user story and 4 people raise a card showing 2 and one person raises a card showing 5, they will then look to the person who said 5 to say, can you tell us why you think this story is that complicated that you've given it a 5? Estimation methods generate conversations. It's not to judge anybody or to assess anybody's technical capability. Because sometimes the people who raise the card showing 2 don't know enough. That's why they raise the card showing 2. And the person who said it's a 5 can then explain to them why it is really a 5. Or it could be the other way. The person who said 5 thought it was complicated. Now they'd explain to that person and they'd be like, oh, actually it's a 2, not a 5. Okay, we have what we call t-shirt sizes, which again, t-shirts are extra small, small, large, extra large, right? They read a story, somebody says small, another person says large, 3 people say large, chances are it's going to be large, but we're not going to discount the person who says small, right? We're going to ask them, why do you think it is small? Okay, however, if we all agree this is extra large, then chances are that story is too big. We need to break it. Remember that user stories need to be small, straight to the point. And when you start writing a user story and you start using and, or, you probably need to break that user story. User story should simply be, as this person, I need to be able to do that activity so that I can reap this reward. But when you start saying, I need to be able to do this activity and that activity and, or, if else, no, that user story is too complicated. You need to simplify it. Those are the kind of user stories that everybody's going to raise extra large. Okay, there's another one called Fibonacci sequence. Okay, and it's a scoring scale. So in this sequence, each number is the sum of the previous 2. So in a Fibonacci sequence, right, you have 0, then 1, right? And then the third number is 1. How did they get that 1? 0 plus 1 is 1, right? And then the next number is 2. How did they get 2? 1 plus 1 is 2. And it goes on and on and on like that. So again, they read the user story. Somebody is going to say 5, right? The reason they said 5 is that now that they know the complexity of 2 and 3, they can read the story and say, actually, this is more like when I combine the complexity of 2 and 3, so it's a 5, and then they say 5. So if you look at all of this, right, it's just different ways of doing the same thing. What are we looking to do here? As a team, can we agree on how long it will take to build this requirement based on how complex it is or not? Okay. I'll pause for a second here. I know that we're covering quite a bit here. Okay, so we've talked about our Scrum ceremonies. We've talked about um, point estimation, which is used to measure how much work we want to do in a particular sprint, or how much, not how much work we want to do, how much work we know we will be able to do in a sprint. So now we're going to look at other terminologies. So you see, I do terminologies a lot, but I try not to do too many terminologies in one class because then it becomes overwhelming, right? Let's talk about assumptions. What are assumptions? These are factors considered true during a project planning, even though it's not been proven. Okay, so let me give you an example of a project cost of an assumption in an IT project, right? That the cost of the project will stay the same. This project is going to last us 3 years, and we're going to need a BA all 3 years. We're hiring a BA in year 1 for 120,000, and then we've assumed that year 2 and year 3 will be 120,000 as well. That's not necessarily true. Even your current BA can ask for a pay increase, but your current BA might leave, and the next BA you find is going to be asking for 20% more than your previous BA. Okay, now that example I gave you is not really, it's about the project team. Within the project itself, there may be different assumptions. Just think of an assumption as something that we know, but we've not proven it. We may not even have a way to prove it until it actually happens. So people make assumptions all the time. The PM, the business, the project team, okay? And there are always assumptions that we make as time goes on because we can't always prove everything. So if we can't prove it, but we think or we know it is true, we will call it an assumption. You don't want to give anybody the impression that no, I try to prove that, and I can tell you categorically that this is it. No, you did not try to prove it, so it is an assumption. I'll see if I can come up with more examples of assumptions just to help you really fully grasp what it is I'm talking about here. What is a business process? It is a series of activities or tasks that once completed will accomplish a goal. Okay? So onboarding a new customer, we have a process for onboarding a new customer. The goal is that this will become a paying customer. At some point, we keep them happy enough that they give us business, right? The reason business process is very important is that it is a way for you to see the input and the output of what happens for us to achieve the results that we're looking for. In your current company, even though you're not working as a BA, it doesn't really matter. You have a lot of processes in your company. In fact, let's just bring it to day-to-day life. Your family eats dinner at night. The goal is for there to be food on the table at night, dinner for people to eat. But there is a process that goes into it. Somebody does the cooking or the buying. The food does not just appear on the table. So we know that the food is the goal. But if we don't understand the process, we may end up with just water on the table at night. So we need to know the process so we know the right time to start it, what we need to do, when to expect an outcome, what the outcome would be for us to get the result that we're looking for. So what are the characteristics of very good processes? One is it is repeatable. Your process should not change with every interaction or with every there was another word that came to mind and I just forget. With every interaction or with every transaction, your process should be the same. If I'm getting on a train, right? I know that I drive to the train station, I park my car, or maybe I take Uber. Anyway, I go to the train station, I get through. It's been a while I took a train. I forget what it's called now, but you know how you tap your card and you get through. and then you get on the train. It is the process. But I am going to this particular city. For me to get there through the train, there is a process I need to follow. Okay. And every single day that I need to get on that train to go to work, the process is the same. It doesn't change all the time. If it changes all the time, I will get frustrated. We don't want our users to be frustrated, right? And so that's usually one of the pain points. Like when they're talking to you as a BA, they may have business processes that are not repeatable. It changes based on who's doing it. So they keep having to figure out, so how do we do it today? How are we doing it tomorrow? Okay. When you're talking to the business and they're telling you about their business processes, look for the ones that change all the time. That is probably a process that needs to be refined. Okay. Secondly, good business processes are finite. They have an end, not the one that keeps going and we don't know the end and everybody's already tired and they just drop it and go home and pick it up tomorrow. Every good process must have an end. It should be flexible as well. If we need to improve on it, we should be able to. Now, there's a difference between repeatable and flexible, right? Flexible just means if there's an opportunity to improve it, we can improve it. But once we improve it, it must be repeatable. And lastly, it is value driven, meaning every part of the process must be adding value to the process. So let's think about the ATM machine, right? You go to withdraw money from the ATM and you need to input your card, you need to insert your card, you need to input your PIN number. You take the money, it may give you a receipt and all of that, right? There's multiple steps there. But if you think about it, every step has a reasonable purpose. Even you can reason with it. Imagine that they remove PIN number from the process, meaning anybody can lay their hands on your card and go withdraw money. Granted, yes, anybody, if they figure out your PIN number, they can still withdraw money. But you can see the purpose PIN number is serving in there. And so when they're telling you about a process, right? And in your mind, you're beginning to think, so step 7 that you told me, you're just thinking, you're not saying anything yet. But step 7, why? If we eliminate step 7, it doesn't take away anything. You ask them the question and say, oh, thank you for walking me through the process. So I was, listening to everything you told me, and I'm just thinking about step 7. What purpose does it serve? And maybe they're thinking, and then all of a sudden they realize, you know what, if we jump from 6 to 8, we're still fine. Okay? So these are some of the things you want to listen for when you're having these conversations. They're telling you about the business process, right? You are asking questions that will help you determine, is it repeatable? Is it finite? Do they start telling you about it and they can bring that conversation to an end? Or they get to a point and they're like, I don't even know what happens after that. Okay, yeah. You as a BA, that is a red flag. You don't know what happens. We need to figure out what happens. Because when we put you in this new system, we need to tell the system where the end is, right? And so these are the things that make you begin to ask more questions. And if you find out it is not finite, well, maybe this is an opportunity to clean up the business process, right? And that will be part of the conversation you're going to have with the business. Okay, a few other ones that we have here, we have what we call CAPEX. You as a BA, honestly, you probably, even if you did 3 years with the company, you probably would never have to worry about CAPEX, but I'll include it for your information, right? It is money a company spends on physical assets, right? Maybe they're buying new assets, they're upgrading old ones, and all of that. Capital expenditure, CAPEX. Change control. So change control is the process of managing change, identifying the need for change, evaluating it, approving it, and implementing it. Okay? The identifying and evaluating may fall largely with you as a BA, but you're not the one approving it, you're not the one implementing it. Okay? And so one of the ways in which change plays out is, okay, we're working on the project, now we're in sprint 13, and then the business all of a sudden wakes up and realizes that one of the things they asked for in sprint 4, they actually asked for the wrong thing. And in all honesty, you did your due diligence as a BA. But remember, you don't know the business like they do. So they've realized their mistake and they've come back to say, oh, we need to change this. Well, Agile supports changing requirements, but not like taking us 6 months back to go change something. If we keep doing that, that project is not going to come to light of day. So they're going to ask you as a BA and say, oh, can we change this? We don't think it'd be too complicated. The way they'll talk about it, you think they are the ones who would actually make the change in the system, right? So when they tell you that, remember, you were not hired to stick your neck out, right? So what would you do? You tell them, oh, absolutely, I'd like to be able to communicate your request to the right parties. Can you put it in writing, please? Right? So they put it in writing, and then you need to understand what the change control process for your company is. Your company may require that for a change like that, the person requesting needs to document it, and then the project team would submit it to the change control board. The change control board is a group of people, appointed by stakeholders who decides on change request, approve or deny, right? You as the BA, please do not approve a change. You do not have the power or the authority to. And do not overpromise and end up under delivering, right? Don't promise them, oh, absolutely, we'll make that change. Okay, tell them you take it away and you talk to the right people and you get back to them. And that's what you really want to do. And that's why we have a change control process, right? Because sometimes we get to a point where we even call it a change freeze, meaning it doesn't matter what you ask for, you're not getting it. We're at the point where we're stabilizing the solution. Go live is in 1 month. We are not making any changes. If you need a change, submit a ticket. We will track it. Once we go live, the project is stable, we'll begin to review all the changes we need to make. Okay? Who will determine the change fees? It is not you. You will be aware so that if anybody were to be asking you for a change during that period, you can communicate it to them to say, oh, we're in the change freeze period, right? But this will be communicated to you by your project manager. You just need to be aware. If the project manager says, oh, we are in the period of change freeze, at least you know what they're talking about. Okay, and we've talked about change control board too. So we have change management plan. Okay, the change management plan is a document that has information about how to go about change. Okay, so when you join the job, they may already have a change management plan. Most companies do not even have it. They have conversations about it. They don't have the actual plan. But best practice is they should have a change management plan, which details, the process for change so that everybody is on the same page. Oh, if there's a change request, it needs to be documented. It's submitted to the change control board every Thursday. The review time takes about a week, meaning within 2 weeks, we should be able to let the business know of the decision. If you don't know what the change management plan is, whether it is in a document or not, if you don't know, right, and you're talking to the business and they're telling you about a change, the next question they will ask you is, oh, when will we hear back from you? And you'll be like, I don't know, let me get back to you. But you could have known if you read the change management plan, or if you at least asked about it before you start talking to the business, right? And then we talked about change request. I already talked about that. It's a formal document submitted to the change control board that requests to the change control board that requests changes to the finalized project management plan, meaning that whatever this change request is, right, it would eventually have an impact on the change on the project management plan. Because if we say we're going to be implementing this for 3 months, right? And somebody is asking for a change 1 week to the end of 3 months, well, you're not going to finish in 3 months, meaning it's going to impact the project plan. Okay, so very important for you as a BA to understand the change process for your company. That way, when people are asking you questions, you know what to tell them. You know how to set expectations, right? You don't tell people, send the request to me via email. If your company doesn't accept email, if your company has a formal document they want your, business, like the departments to fill out, and you're aware, once they're telling you about change, you'll be like, oh, absolutely, I'll send you the change request form. Please fill it out with as much information as possible, and I will get it across to the change control board because you're aware of the process, right? Okay, so let's look at an example. A new requirement surfaces on the need to be able to edit a transaction up to 2 hours after it is submitted. As a business analyst, what do you do? you start thinking, right? What is the impact to time, cost, and scope? What is the impact to testing? What are the risks involved? If you're telling me you want people to be able to edit transactions up to 2 hours after, so A transfers money to B. B already took out the money and sent it and spent it, but A has the power to edit that transaction up to 2 hours. That is not going to happen. Chances that is not going to happen. So this will be analyzed. You are not, you as the BA, you won't make a decision and say, this doesn't make sense. No, we're not going to do it. No, you won't say that. You have them documented and then you let your PM know about it. We're going to talk about, is this even feasible? Does it even make sense? Is it introducing a risk to the business? All of this will be discussed and talked about by the project team so that when you're going back to the business to tell them why it can't happen, right? In fact, before you go back to the business team, remember this is going to the change control board, right? But it helps the change control board when you've done the hard work of understanding and documenting the impact to time, cost, scope, impact to testing, the risk involved. When you present all of that information to the change control board, you've just made their life easy. They're going to like you a lot. And you've given them enough information to be able to make an informed decision on that request. So again, do not look at a request at face value and don't just take a request and run with it. Do some analysis on it, right? So that whoever you're giving it to, you're helping them do their job more efficiently. Okay, so I talked about change freeze, the point at which scope changes to a project are no longer permissible. Decomposition is the process of breaking down anything into smaller chunks, right? So remember we talked about epic. The epic is a huge user story, right? We don't build epics, we decompose them. We break them down into smaller pieces and then we build the smaller pieces and then bring the smaller pieces together when we're done building. So that is decomposition. What is gold plating? Making changes to a project that are outside the original agreed upon scope. Okay? There is a difference between gold plating and scope creep. Scope creep is when, and maybe I'll clean this up a bit so that you're not misled when you're reading it. Scope creep is when the business is asking for more than what was agreed upon. So we have a fixed time, fixed amount of money, right? And we've agreed to do this 100 user stories. If the business is coming to then add 10 more user stories to it, that may be scope creep, right? Chances are it is scope creep. I use the word may because they may be removing 10 from the original 100. These 10 are no longer relevant, and these are the 10 that are relevant. So it's a timing thing too, right? But just know that scope creep is when it is the business asking for more than was agreed on. Gold plating is when it is the team, the project team is the one doing more than what they've been asked. So they've asked for a login page, the logo top right, all of that, right? But your developers have this great artistic ability that they feel like they can just make the page look a certain way that anybody who sees that page just doesn't want to close the page. That is not what you've been asked. That is gold plating. Gold plating is when you order like a Ferrari, right? And you order Model 3. I don't even know if there's anything like a Model 3 Ferrari. I made that up. But you ordered Model 3, and Model 3 doesn't have gold rims, but Ferrari just slaps on gold rims. Ferrari wouldn't even do it because it's going to cost them more money. But that's the idea behind gold plating. Okay? So you as the BA, watch out for your team if they're gold plating or the business if they're scope creeping. Okay, one other term. I'm just going to quickly check something here. And then I'll go back. Okay. So what we're looking at here is issue log. Put simply, issue log is a log that reflects all the issues we have today. So remember, as we're building those requirements, right, there's no guarantee that when we build this user story, it would actually work the way that it should. So when you as the BA sit and you're like, no, this is not what the business asked for, right? Or there's something about the page that isn't working, or one of the acceptance criteria failed, right? We document it in the issue log. this needs to be looked at. Somebody needs to fix it. So this is an example of an issue log. The one for your company may look slightly different, but the general idea is, we want to know what is the issue, when was it reported, who reported it, who's the owner, like, who's responsible for it, and what is the severity of it. Okay? Severity and priority. Severity is how bad is this issue we have. And priority is how important is this functionality. Okay? And then we want to know the status of the issue. Because once the issue is resolved, we don't delete it from the issue log. We update the status to maybe closed. So at the end of the project, we may have an issue log that has like 500 issues, right? And 300 of them are closed. Or 400 of them are closed, 50 of them are work in progress, but they're not, the 50 that are work in progress are not critical to the operation of the tool, and 50 of them are new. We've just decided these ones are not critical. We will get to it when we get to it, even if it's post-implementation, right? But we just want to know the status of all of the issues, okay? So that's an issue log. We talked about return on investment already, right? When we're writing a business case, right? We do the cost benefit analysis. And so when we're asking for 1 million for the implementation of Top Shop, because they want to implement Salesforce, right? We're going to tell them the return on investment. So when I presented the business case to you, return on investment was we're going to save X dollars annually on admin, and we're going to increase our revenue by Y dollars yearly for the next 10 years. That is the return on investment. Return on investment, I buy $1,000 worth of stock. By this time next year, I want my 1,000. My 1,000 has become 10,000. What is the return on investment? 9,000. Return on investment is whatever you gain over and above what you invested. Okay. Then risk. We've talked about risk, right? Every company has what we call a risk appetite and a risk tolerance. The risk appetite is the amount and type of risk an organization is willing to accept for gains. And I'll give you examples shortly. Whereas the risk tolerance is the amount of variation in performance that the organization is willing to accept. So let's look at speed limits, for example. Depending on, what the province that you're in or the state that you're in, right? Your state for certain roads might have a risk appetite that is 0 to 70 miles per hour. Our appetite can accommodate up to 70 miles per hour. This is the amount of risk we're willing to, the amount of risk we're willing to accept from our drivers. However, the risk tolerance is the difference in between the maximum of the appetite and where we're going to say, you know what, you've gone way past what we're going to accept and now you're getting a ticket. What does that mean? If the road says 70 miles per hour is the speed limit, if you were doing 71, chances that you will not get a ticket. If you're doing 72, 73, you may not get a ticket. If you're doing 74 to 77, you may get a warning, right? Or maybe if you do up to 80, you may get a warning. If you go past 80, you are getting a ticket. And then if you go past 83 times, you lose a point on your driver's license. So I hope you see the difference between a risk appetite and a risk tolerance. Risk appetite is our sweet spot. This is the range we're okay with. If you go past it a little bit, we will tolerate it, but only to a certain level. So let's bring that to project environment. We've identified a risk in the project, right? This is the boundary that we're willing to accept, right? Anything above this happens, right? Okay, let's use a real example. Let's look at the project team as a risk. We're developing the solution that is so unique that even put the team together was a headache. Finally, we have the team, okay? If 20% of our team resigns, meaning we have 0 to 80, we are fine. We will manage somehow. If another 10% resigns, we will be stretched. but that will not destroy the project team. However, if 1% more, so we started with 100, right? Let's say 10 people on the project team. Okay, we have 10 people on the project team. That includes the BA, developers, admin, QA, product owner, whoever needs to be on the project team. If one person resigns, we will still be fine. It took forever to put this team together. We know there's not many people with the skill set we're looking for, but if one person leaves, we'll be fine. We have multiple developers, multiple BAs. But if two people resign, or let's say if two developers resign, of the three that we have entered a range of unacceptable risk. We have exceeded our risk tolerance. Okay? So even on the project, right? We say that if at any given point, the issues we have, the failed user stories we have, is 10% of the total developed user stories at any given point. If the errors we have is 10% of the total number of user stories we've developed, our risk appetite accommodates it. If the errors get up to 20% of the total stories, so we've developed a total of 100 user stories and 20 of them have bugs, we have hit the limit of our risk tolerance. If we now go to 21%, meaning 21 of the 100, we have exceeded our risk tolerance. We need to act immediately. Okay, I'm just going to check. Okay, I'll come back to this later. So Precious, I'm just going to quickly answer. Precious said, isn't gold plating a good thing? Gold plating is not a good thing. Anytime you do more than what was asked, it is not a good thing. Because remember that you, as the BA or the developer, you are not the one managing the project. You see, project managers lose sleep because they're counting dollars every day. Do I have enough dollars to pay for the project? So when a developer begins to gold plate, that developer is going to get paid, even though they're doing what they were told not to do. Maybe they're going to spend 8 hours extra doing it. A developer is not going to gold plate and say, I gold plated for free. They want to be paid, even though they've done what was not requested of them. There is no project or project manager that wants gold plating. It is not a good thing. If it has not been asked for or agreed upon, it is not a good thing. Do not do it. And if you, the BA, sees it happening, have a conversation with the project manager about it. Okay? So anyway, I hope I answered that. So I just explained the difference between risk tolerance and risk appetite. So for your company, for your project, know what the risk appetite is, know what the risk tolerance is. You, the BA, you're not the one determining it. You need to be aware. In fact, a lot of what I've talked about here, let's just go back a bit. So the sprint ceremonies, right, will be managed by the Scrum Master or the project manager. You will contribute to it. You will be a part of the meeting. They may even ask you to schedule the meeting, but you're usually not the one leading the meeting. But you want to go to the meeting and know what they're talking about at the minimum, right? We've talked about story points. Usually you, as the BA, you're not estimating a story, but you need to be aware. In case anybody is getting overwhelmed and saying, oh, this is all too much, I'm just a BA, why do I need to do? No, you do not need to do this. But this is project speak, right? These are conversations you're going to be a part of, so you need to feel comfortable with it. Okay? We talked about other terminologies. You're going to be working closely with business processes, right? In fact, that's one of the main reasons why you've been hired. So you need to know this really well. We talked about CAPEX is just for you to know. Your change control process, you need to be aware. You do not lead it. You are just a facilitator. Somebody has a change, give them the right document to fill, submit it to the right person, and then get feedback from the parties making the decision and communicate it back to the person who requested the change. Okay? So this is the change process, right? Then I explained the change request example to you. We talked about change freeze, decomposition, gold plating. Usually a BA will not gold plate, right? Because all you're doing is writing requirements and getting approval from the business on the requirements, right? Typically would be, maybe like the developer or the admin, gold plating. Unless you, the BA, was gold plating through your requirements, but that would be on another level. I don't even know any BA who does that. Hopefully, that is not you. We looked at the project log, issue log. You're usually not the one creating the issue log, but you need to know, you need to be aware. You need to know what issues are in there. If there's anything here that is high priority and it doesn't seem to be moving, the person they've assigned it to is not working on it. You as a BA want to have a conversation with them because you know that functionality is very important to the business, right? We talked about return on investment, then we talked about risk. Okay. So before I go on here, give me a second, let me see what we have in here. Okay. Paul said, I see high and urgent on priority. Kindly clarify why we have both. So Paul, I explained this, but I'll explain it again in case you didn't get it. So you see, you said, I see high and urgent. Oh, yeah, no, I actually didn't explain that part. I take that back. I thought you were saying severity and priority. So again, so Paul, that was Paul, right? This is just an example, right? So even though it's an example, I'll explain it. But the reason I'm saying that is I don't want you to get caught up on examples. Understand the rationale behind it. So that when you get on your job, for all you know, you may get to your own job and only 3 of these columns are on the issue log for your job. Okay, so I'm still going to explain this, but don't get caught up on all of this. Understand the concept of issue log so that when you see one at your company, you at least know what it's about. For this priority column here where we have high and urgent, something may be high priority. It's important, but it's not urgent because if everything needs to be done today, yet we have 2 developers. 2 developers cannot do everything today. That's number one. Number two is that sometimes there may be a dependency. So like, let's just say code model issue, which is number one, right? Number two, user access issue, okay, needs to be done before code model issue. So even though they're both high, we need to do number two before we do number one. Because if we don't fix number two, the solution for number one cannot be complete. So there may be multiple reasons why one is high, one is urgent. One may be dependency related. One may be just to single out that one out of all the highs that we need to solve today before we go home. It can be any of those. But like I said, I encourage you, Paul, and I encourage everybody on the call is as I teach, please understand the concept of what I'm teaching, not so much the nitty-gritty details, because even in my own career, from job to job, it is not the same. Oftentimes it is night and day. But because I understand the concept, it doesn't matter what environment you bring me into, I'll be fine. Okay? So Precious already answered your question. Isn't gold plating a good thing? So does the BA really have to worry about it? Gold plating is not a good thing, like I said. The BA does not need to worry about anything. Your job is not to worry. It is to know if it is happening and have the right conversations about it. If your developers are gold plating, they stand the risk of not getting to the other important stuff because there's only so many hours in a day. And the project only has so much money to pay. So all the developers or anybody building should be focusing on high priority, then medium priority, then low priority, rather than taking one high priority and gold plating it when they should have moved on to the next one that is high priority. So a developer might get caught up doing this, but you as a BA, right? That's why, when I say a BA is the one who goes around watching what is being done, having conversations about it, this is part of the job. Okay, this is part of the job. Touching base with your developers, how are things going? Do you need help from me with anything? Do I need to clarify anything? Of course, you don't want to be poking. You don't want to give them the impression that you're watching what they're doing because you really shouldn't be doing it. Okay, but if a user story should take one day, if the developer is gold plating, it's one of two things. They're not going to finish it in a day, or they could have moved on to something else and done 2 stories in one day instead. At the time that the developer is gold plating, you will not know because they're building, right? They're building. But when they deliver it and you look at it, you'll be like, okay, this is more than what the business asked for. And the reason you're having the conversation is not so that the developer can go undo it, it's that you don't want that behavior to continue. Because if it continues, the project money will finish And if you were hired as a contractor, chances are you have to look for another job anyway. So it may look like, oh, well, it's not my business as a BA. But when the project money finishes, it actually finishes. They terminate the contractors. And these are part of one of the things that leads to that happening. So look at it as collective responsibility. If you see gold plating, speak up. Do you need to worry about it? No, it's nothing to worry about. Now you know what gold plating is about. If you see it, you need to have conversations about it. Okay? Olusegun said gold plating comes at a cost. Absolutely, it does. It does. Okay. Awesome. So we've done issue log, we've looked at risk, and now we're going into SWOT. And this is what we call strength, weakness, opportunity, and threats. Okay. Just gonna take a quick cup of water here. Okay. SWOT analysis is used to understand the influencing factors and how it can affect an initiative, right? So basically, what are we saying? If we look at the project team, for example, and by project team, let's, for the purposes of this conversation, include the business as well, the people the BA will be talking to. Every time I say the business, I mean the departments within your organization that you as a BA will be talking to. Okay? So strength, what does the group do really well? Okay? Maybe your company already has a very robust IT system, right? So that when you implement this new tool, it will just fit right in. Sometimes companies don't have a well-developed IT system, yet they want to implement this new tool, but they realize it at first they need to implement that other tool, right? There is a dependency. Okay, so we want to implement this $1 million tool, but we just realized that for it to work really well, there's this 200K tool that we need to implement, right? So anyway, a strength is what the group does well. What is working really well for the group? What are they experts in? Okay, weaknesses would be functions that the group is not so great at. Okay, opportunities will be external factors that they can take advantage of. And threats will be external factors that can negatively affect the group. So obviously, you want to know you, and by you, I mean like your group, your organization, your team, you want to know what your strengths are, right? What do? You build on your strength, you leverage it. Okay, if you have weaknesses as a team, you want to keep an eye on it to see if it's getting out of hand. If there are potential opportunities out there, for your company, right? New markets, new technology, that's an opportunity. This may even be the reason why we're implementing this project, right? And threats, external factors that can affect you. So threats may be even your competition. In your industry, your company is number 2, right? There's a very, very close number 3 that, if you don't make this change today, they're going to become number 2 and they're going to kick you to number 3. So SWOT analysis can be done for anything. It can be done within your project team. It can be done at the organization level. But it helps companies to know what this is, right? So they know how to plan themselves and how to work. Will they ask a BA to go do a SWOT analysis for the entire company or for a part of the company or even for your team? If your company wanted this, chances are you will contribute to it. Okay? It's rare for them to tell one BA and say, go do this entire thing because there's a lot of work that actually goes into it depending on the size of your company, their complexity, their business processes, right? So if you look at this diagram here, strengths, what do we do well? What do our customers and partners like about us? Okay, how are we doing better than our competition? What is unique about what we do or the service that we offer? What assets do we own? What is it about us that puts us above some of our competition? So this is looking at it at a company level, right? Remember I said you could look at it at a team level as well. But this example here is looking at a company level. This is a way for a company, by the time a company does this study, they get to know themselves better and they're able to plan for the future better as well. So it talks about weaknesses, what can be improved upon, what do our customers and partners not like about us, how are we lagging behind our competition, and where are we lacking in knowledge. Those are weaknesses. When we know what our weaknesses are, then we can address them. In fact, doing this SWOT analysis, like I said earlier, is sometimes what births a project. Because when we know this, right, we know the weakness, we know what we need, we know the gaps we need to bridge, we know the opportunities out there we can take advantage of, we know what our strengths are, we know the threats, right? We can then come up with a solution to get us to the next level. So depending on when you as a BA, when you're hired, they could have done this before they hire you, they may do it after, or they may never even do it. Most of the companies that I've worked in have not done a SWOT analysis. However, if you end up in a company where they are doing a SWOT analysis, they want to do one, now you have an idea of what needs to go into that. So if they say, oh, James, we need you to go do some research on opportunities, these are some of the questions you want to answer in whatever document you're going to come up with. Okay. So second here. I don't want to. Okay, we have just about 4 slides, and hopefully we'll have a lot of time to take questions. So, key performance indicator, also known as KPI. This is key performance indicator is really how we measure performance sometimes. In this context, I'm talking about project, but it's not only projects, right? You can apply even KPI in your personal life. KPIs are just used to measure, how well we're performing, basically. So in the context of a project, right, we will identify what the KPI is before we begin the project so that way, as we make progress in the project, we're checking it against our KPI to say, are we where we said we will be? If one of the KPIs, this project is going to last for 1 year, and we've decided and agreed that our KPI is that at the end of every quarter, we will have built 25% of the solution. Then at the end of that quarter, we're going to look at the entire list of requirements that we have to check, did we actually build 25%? Okay. So KPI is always connected to a corporate goal. So remember how even your user story stems from the business requirement. We started from the project need before we got to the marketing manager's need. If the marketing manager's need does not feed into the business requirement, we're not doing it. Okay? So KPI is always connected to corporate goals. They are decided by management, right? So that 25% done at the end of each quarter is decided by management, not you, the PA, not even the PM. It's by management, right? KPIs are easy to understand. Anybody should be able to read it and say, this is what we are talking about. Okay? So examples, number of unresolved issues must not exceed 25 at any point in time. Issues found in code review must not exceed 50 at any point in time. Issues found by QA must not be higher than 15% of the sprint stories for every sprint. Okay, so I think this is the last thing we're looking at here. Yeah, design decision. So design decision is a decision that needs to be made at some point in the process. It needs to be A or B. It can't be A and B. So let's look at a background issue here. In the current state, right? So this is just imagine this company, right? In the current state, employees can choose to take paid time off or unpaid time off. If an employee takes unpaid time off, the dollars in their vacation bank is paid out later in the year. Okay? This process is manually managed. Okay? In the future state, vacation bank payout will only be allowed if the collective bargaining agreement governing the location allows vacation payout. If it is not allowed, employees at the site or at the company must take paid vacation. So in simple terms, this is what's going on here. This is a unionized environment, right? Today, An employee can take their vacation time in January, but they don't want to be paid the money till December because they like to get a bigger check in December so they can have a fantastic Christmas. But the collective bargaining agreement does not state that. So what we want in the future states is that to honor the collective bargaining agreements that states it, because imagine this as a very big company with locations everywhere. Not every location is unionized. So we're saying for the locations that are not unionized, employees there, when they take the vacation, they get paid for that vacation when they take the vacation. But if the collective bargaining agreement for their location allows them to defer payment, then they can defer payment. So let's look at what is really the design decision we need to make for both scenarios. Okay? For scenario one, right? Pros, employees are already familiar with the process. It is what they do today. There is no change management required. You keep your employees happy. Well, the downside of that is that it doesn't agree to union agreements. So some locations do not have this requirement from their union. Scenario two is if we implement option two where we only defer payment if your location has a collective bargaining agreement that allows them to defer payment. Okay, so it aligns with the collective bargaining agreement if we go with option two. The downside of that is you have to do change management and employees are going to be unhappy. Okay, so in case you are wondering, so what is this document? Why can't the business just make a decision and tell us what the decision is so we can build the system appropriately? The reason why there's this design decision is that anything that impacts employee morale, right? Companies are very careful with the change. So what you as the BA will do is that now that you've seen these two options, from a system standpoint, we can implement both. So the system is not a problem. It is the non-system issue we're talking about here. So your PM may say, okay, Abiola, we need to create a design decision. Make it very clear, straight to the point. We will put this design decision in front of management. Let management make a decision. So you prepare what we call a design decision document. How would you know when to prepare one and when not to prepare one? You will think of it yourself. When you find yourself in a situation where there is a change that is going to make half of the people happy and half sad, then there's a major decision that needs to be made, and you will not make that decision. You will document it, you put the pros and the cons in there, and then your PM will submit it to management. And management can make a decision. When management makes a decision, we will communicate it to it will be communicated through the change management process, right? And then we'll build the solution based on based on the decision made by management. So we're going to stop here. We'll start lesson 4 on Monday. If you have any questions, please raise your hands and we'll go through the questions now. There are no questions in here, so I think we're good here. Okay. Mobola, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Abiola. Good evening. I have a couple of questions. So
okay.
The first one I'll go with is about the sprint. You taught us about sprint today.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in a situation and I was asked that I'm in a mid and a high requirement request came from executive. How would I treat this request? And it needs to be implemented. And they went a step further because it's a Salesforce BA role. And they said, assuming this requirement can be fulfilled declaratively, how would you handle this situation?
Okay. Mobola, if you don't mind, can you repeat your question, please? The entirety of the question.
All right. The scenario is that we are in the middle of a sprint.
In the middle of a sprint?
Yes.
Okay.
And a requirement came from an executive. It's a high requirement that came in from an executive. And they wanted to know what steps I would take. And they want it to be fulfilled within that sprint. And secondly, they took it further to say that, because they say first project, to say that if it were an enhancement project and this solution could be preferred declaratively, how do you handle it?
Okay, so two main things in there, right? It is in the middle of a sprint. Is this happening at your current job or is this a fictitious?
No, 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 no. This was an interview question.
Oh, okay. So it's an interview question, right? Okay, so
Yes.
number one, you're in the middle of a sprint, right? If the people interviewing you know what they're doing, they know you don't make changes in the middle of a sprint. So that may even as well be a test, right? You're not working as a one-man team usually. So there are many scenarios that are even coming to my mind. Number one, if you will be the one making the solution, right? You're going to go into the system and make the changes and all of that. But as much as they say BAs don't build, in reality, some jobs will have the BA build. Not common, but it can happen. Okay? This sprint has been decided on. You're working in a team that has agreed on the sprint and they bring a change. They request a change, high priority change. So you can see the logic behind their thinking, why they want the change. Maybe there's even a dependency, or they just need it to they need it to happen immediately. Number one, that tells me that this is my interpretation. This is not a project. Because if it's something they want done immediately and will go live immediately, it's not going live with the rest of the project. Do you understand what I mean? This is a solution they want to implement and they want people to use immediately. Is that what it is?
Yeah, so what I thought was that I was just thinking in two different ways, because what they said for the other one was like, it's an existing functionality that requires enhancements.
Yeah, so that's not a project to start with. And that's the point I'm trying to make, right? It is not,
Yeah.
I've always spoken in terms of a project. So when I said that we don't change anything in the middle of a sprint, right? It is doing a project. Remember that this project we're working on, it hasn't gone live and it's not going live tomorrow. We're going to be building over 6 months. Even though we're doing Agile, we build every 2 weeks, we stabilize it. What we've built is not going live yet, typically. In this case, it sounds like they want to hire you as an operations BA, right? Who's going to help them with fixes they need along the line for their day to day. So I really don't see how there's a sprint. I don't know if you understand did they use the word sprint?
I do. Yeah, they use the
They
word
use the
sprint.
word
So
sprint.
yes, yes, they use the
Yeah.
word sprint.
So if I were in your shoes anyway, I'd even try to understand the question because the question isn't adding up. This is an operations thing, right? Because what they want to change is something that will be used immediately. So it's not like a project we're doing for 5 months and at the end of 5 months, it will go live. If that was the case, right, we'll just
Yeah.
put it in the next sprint and it will get done. This person requesting it would not know the difference anyway, because at the end of the 5 months, we'll deliver the project to them.
Mm-hmm.
However, if it was operations, right, and we're just doing fixes for our day-to-day work, well, we'll add it to the list and then we'll reprioritize the list. If this is the most important thing, let's say we've determined that number 5 is the most important, and then tomorrow morning, this executive comes and says, oh, this one you have to tackle immediately. Even if you're the one who will fix it, you still need to talk to your project team about it. Your project manager needs to be aware, okay? And then you reprioritize and maybe move that one to the top of the list. So I
All
hope you
right.
understand what I mean. There are two
Yes,
different
I
things.
do.
How
I
you will
do.
tackle it if it's a project, right? And how you tackle it if it's operations, two completely different things. And
Okay.
if you were to be asked that question in an interview, get clarity first. What is the context here? Because the way they're using Scrum and they're saying they want the solution immediately, even Scrum doesn't work like that. As agile as it is, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if it were like best business practice or business rule that once a sprint has started, requirements can be added for a new project, a new implementation project.
Oh, yes,
However,
that is
if
the general rule.
rules,
Are there
okay,
exceptions? Yes.
okay, all
And
right.
an exception would be like the example that I gave. We selected stories into this sprint. We started the sprint, but one of the developers realized that even the story I selected, if I don't build the one I left in the product backlog, I can't build this one that I selected. So let's say we selected a total of 2 stories, right? We have 2 developers. Developer 1 will develop one, developer 2 will develop two. And then developer 2 realizes that This story they gave me, I cannot even build it. Well, you're not going to have them just sit down for 2 weeks and not do anything, right? So in exceptional situations like that, changes may be made. Return the story and pick the new one. But the general rule is that once the first day of the sprint has started, you do not add anything to the sprint. It's the general rule.
All right, thank you. My
Yeah.
second question is on the issue log you taught us. Looking at the issue log, I'm assuming that those are failed product backlog items, user stories, I meant. Now, where is that stored, and like where is that document located? Is it
Yes,
on their
it can be
Jira?
located anywhere. They can have it in Jira. They can have it in SharePoint. It depends on how sophisticated your company is. It can be anywhere. The most
Okay, I also
important
saw
thing is
that.
it must exist, but where is not as relevant.
Okay, so if the issue is tracked on that issue log, does that mean that those user stories goes back into the product backlog item? And because it's prioritized on that sheet as urgent and high, does that mean it's prioritized above other items for the next sprint?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So remember that the stories you're selecting into the sprint itself, they are the high priority ones. When they fail, they are not reducing in priority, they're still very high priority. So our priority will be to fix them. You don't return them to the product backlog. Once stories leave the product backlog, they generally don't return. They either get, they're either on this spot where we're still trying to figure it out, or they pass, right? And then they join the list of past stories. But the priority is still high. We still need to fix it. In fact, sometimes what happens is, so again, let's say we started with 100 user stories. And in sprint one, we've selected 5 user stories. At the end of the sprint, we've built, we've tested, and one of the user stories failed. That one failed user story may as well be the first user story for sprint two, because we need to fix it. We put it in sprint one for a reason. And so time ran out on us in sprint one. What is most likely to happen is we are going to then put it into sprint two and then add just enough user stories to sprint two to complete sprint two. Do you understand, Mobola?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
You do? Okay. Awesome. Demilade, go ahead, please. Demilade, are you there? If you're talking, we can't hear you.
Hi, good evening, Abiola. So
Good
sorry about
evening.
that. Yeah. So my question will be taking us back to yesterday's class. I actually raised my hand up yesterday, and you said you were gonna
Okay.
mention it today.
Oh,
So
right,
my
right.
my questions are in twos, one from yesterday and one from today, and I think that should be all. So
Okay.
yesterday we discussed requirements gathering, and so I have this small question like what is your recommended best practice in this regard? Like, do you hold the conversations, then you get back home and you summarize the conversation in your head, or you document while the conversation is going on, or you do a audio recording or something of that nature? Like, what's your recommended best practice? You just document this
Okay, so
feedback you
I'll
get from
answer that
stakeholders of the
before
business.
you. Okay, I'll answer that before you ask the next one, because otherwise I may
Okay,
forget question one.
okay,
So there is no best practice. What I will tell you what I do, but it depends on you. I don't even recommend what I do. What I do when I go into a requirement meeting is that obviously, and everybody should do this, capture what you're being told the best that you can, right? Some people like to record once they get permission from the person they're talking to, and then take the recording away, play it over again, and then document it. I do not like to listen to recording. So I type, but I type very fast. Well, relatively fast, I think. I'm sure that people type faster than me. So I could be talking to you and I'm typing as I'm listening to you. The thing is, I know how to sift through information. I've been working as a BA for a long time, right? So I know fact from backup information. So as you're telling me, I'm documenting the fact as we go. And I'm processing it as fast as I can as well. So I'm asking you follow-up questions and we're going back and forth. That's what I do. For somebody who's just starting, even if you're the fastest typer in the world, because the process of quickly analyzing that information and knowing the next question to ask, you may not necessarily be able to do it while typing and listening at the same time. That still, even for me, came with time. So that's what I do. And that's why I said I don't even recommend people do it. Whenever you can, ask the person you're meeting with if you can record them, record it and then take it away and play it. Do you understand? Just listen to the conversation, give it your full attention and ask questions. It will serve you better than trying to type it all and then you miss the opportunity to ask questions. And first you need to go and listen to it and then you book another meeting to ask the questions. Now, I'm not trying to say that you get only one meeting. You know, I've had jobs where I met with a particular person for 2 to 3 months, maybe once every week, once every other week. But I was building on the conversation. You know what I mean? Not that I'll
Yeah.
have meeting one and then I'll use meeting two to ask questions on meeting one. They'll get tired of you pretty fast if you do that.
Okay.
So that
Okay.
would be my recommendation. Record it, but just spend that time focusing on the person and asking questions. It is a
Okay.
recommendation. I wouldn't even say it's best practice, but you need to figure out your own style. With time, you will, and then just
Okay.
use it. The most important thing is that when you're in front of that person, whether like via Zoom or one-on-one, let them feel like they have your full attention. So I'm
Okay.
not the type that types and I'm looking down consistently. I'm still looking at you most of the time while I'm typing. So they still feel that connection, right? Because what you don't want to do is for them to get to the point where they're like, I don't even want to talk to him anymore, kind of thing. So anyway, what is question number 2?
Okay, thank you very much. Question two is from today's class.
Okay.
We discussed an instance when a company has no Scrum Master and a BA has to fill in for or to play that role. So
Mm-hmm.
my question, an instance when you have a staff that declines invites for meetings, like as a Scrum Master, I believe maybe he or she might have developed say attributes to just help curb such occurrences. But as a BA, like how do you manage an instance when you invite staff maybe for common gathering and you send meeting invites and they keep declining on every request you make? How do you proceed with such?
Okay. So, and you said if you don't have a scrum master, is that what you said?
Yeah. Like the BA plays the role of the Scrum Master.
Yeah, so if you don't have, there has to be somebody higher than you on the project, like hierarchy wise, right? You just talk to the next person. If there's no scrum master, there's usually like a BA manager, there's a project sponsor, there's always somebody, as long as you're a BA, there's always somebody, above you in that hierarchy that you can talk to them and let them know.
Okay. I think that answers my
Yeah.
question.
But
Thank you
if
very
there's
much,
a
Abiola.
scrum master or a project manager, you don't want to go above them.
It saves me the trouble. Okay. I get.
Apart from the
I get.
fact that it saves you the trouble, you don't want to go past the project manager to go to the project sponsor.
Oh, I don't mean sponsors. I mean like say maybe you have staffs, I don't know, your stakeholders, and you need just maybe questions to just get feedback on
Oh, no, yeah, I
maybe.
understand that. But what I'm saying is
Okay.
that, because the example you gave is if there's no scrum master, what would you do? And I said, talk to the next person, right? So I just
Okay.
felt the need to add, but if that next person is a scrum master, because the example you gave is if there's no scrum master, right? So if there's a scrum
Yeah.
master, talk to the scrum master, not
Okay.
somebody else. Yeah, that's what I
Okay.
meant. Okay.
Thank you very much, Abiola.
Yeah, no problem. Lucky.
Yeah, Abiola, good evening. Very impactful session as usual. Thank you so much. I just want to
Mhm.
ask a quick question. So, in this agile team, um, where does the BA really operate? Because if I go by the literal Scrum.org recommendation, it says that the dev team comes up with the user stories and they estimate the user story, or estimate the work because they know um better what needs to be done. So where
Mhm.
exactly does the
So
BA?
they said, okay, so they said the dev team comes up with the user stories, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but the BA is the one meeting with the business. So how did the dev team come up with the user stories? One of two things. One of two things.
So my understanding is
One,
that it's the product owner who meets with the stakeholders to better understand what it is they're trying to, what the stakeholders are trying to
right.
achieve.
Right. So oftentimes there is no product owner. You are the BA and you're acting as the product owner, right? And in many situations, when you hear the dev team, the BA is included. Even though they call it the dev team, some other places they call it the project team. The developers will never come up with their own user stories. And if they do, they shouldn't. Either the BA or the product owner will come up with the user story. And they can call them whatever team they want to call them, dev team, project team. If they call them dev team, yes, the BA is part of that dev team.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? So
yeah,
the BA plays a huge role. It's almost like the dev, like the rest of the dev team. If the BA doesn't feed them what they're working on, they're not working. Because the BA is the one meeting with the people who have actual requirements, right? And the BA is the one getting these requirements, refining them, validating them, and communicating the requirements to the rest of the development team. So the BA plays a huge, huge role. In fact, when the developers are working on the user stories and they get stuck, they're like, I don't fully understand, even though we talked about it during the sprint planning, right? But in the middle of the sprint, they may get stuck and they're like, I'm not sure. Should I build it this way or build it that way? I need to go talk to Abiola for her to re-explain it to me. You're going to do a lot of that. When QA is testing, they'll come to you, say, Abiola, tell me, what actual behavior do they want? I understand the user story and the acceptance criteria, but should it be this way or should it be that way? So that's really the life of a BA.
In a situation where the requirements are a bit technical, and the BA isn't exactly technically inclined, how does one navigate that situation?
So when you say the requirements are technical, to start with, if you are writing user stories, your requirement will not be technical. If they are, you haven't written them well. Okay? And there is a place for, there is no way you as a BA would write requirements and you will not understand it. So when you say the requirements are technical, who wrote them? Because if you didn't understand it, how did you write it? So if they're actually technical, maybe you did not write them. And remember, when we first started talking about requirements, I told you they're functional requirements, they're business requirements, they're technical requirements. And what did I say? A BA does not write technical requirements.
Technical requirements, yeah.
So there's no way you would write a requirement you do not understand. If you don't understand it, you can't help other people understand it. So the types of requirements you will write as a BA, you will understand it. In fact, if you don't understand it, my recommendation, don't share with anybody. Because when they start asking you questions, you should find a video of a sprint planning meeting online. I don't know if there's any. Everybody's looking at the BA and say, so tell me this, tell me that, because you wrote it, right? You wrote it and you brought it to the team. So you need to know it in and out, top to bottom, that no matter what question they're asking you, you can tell them the answer.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Maybe what I was trying to say wasn't, technical requirements. Like maybe the conversation you're meeting with the stakeholder and you're trying to understand what it is you're trying to achieve, but for some reason they are doling out a lot of technical terms that you're not exactly very familiar with. Say for instance, now we trained in Salesforce, but you're having to meet with a stakeholder that is discussing requirements for let's say for instance an identity management system that is in Salesforce inclined.
Yeah, okay, and that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked. If you're in that situation, right, take somebody from your team who would understand what they're talking about. Do not sit in a meeting where you have no clue what they're saying. Do not do it. In fact, once the meeting starts and you start getting the sense that you're totally lost, look for a way to wrap up the meeting and tell them you'll be back. Schedule another meeting. It is okay for you as a BA to have somebody accompany you to help you understand what it is they're asking for. That is okay.
That makes sense.
But the type of requirements generally that you should be working with, because see, requirements are what needs to happen in the system, not how it should happen in the system. I find that when conversation starts getting technical, it is because people are talking about how it should be done, not what should be done. Even if you're talking about IAM, identity and access management, tell me what you need the system to do from an IAM standpoint. For a user to log in, this needs to happen. These are the requirements for IAM. Tell me what they are, but don't tell me the configuration. Don't tell me how it needs to happen. That is not the purpose of a requirement gathering meeting. So chances are when you as a BA go into a meeting, you should be able to follow the conversation because it should not be technical. But I never say never, right? Let's say there's a valid case for a requirement gathering meeting that is technical. If you already know, get a technical person from your team to help you facilitate the conversation. There is an activity that BAs do. It's called the user acceptance testing. We'll get to it at a later lesson. Sometimes a BA would invite a technical person to come to the UAT with them because there's a technical part of the application they need to show that, they're just not the best person to show. So it is okay to leverage, the skill set of your team when you can, but that can't be you every day because otherwise, why are you there?
True.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions before we wrap it up for today? Any questions, any comments? Did a light bulb come on for anybody as I was teaching? Did anything come to mind in terms of your current or past experience? Anything of that sort? We have about 5 minutes left. None? Well, good. We're all ready for the weekend, right? I know. Mohammed, do we have groups? Like, are we already into groups if we wanted to have like a project?
Yes, absolutely. They've been shared into groups.
Okay, are you able to share that with me, please? Because we have to start practicalizing some of what we've learned just to make sure, we fully understand it. If you can share that with
No
me, that would
problem.
be
I will
great.
do that. I will do just that.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. If you don't have any questions for me, I hope you have a fantastic weekend and we will reconnect on Monday.
Thanks, Abiola.
No problem.
Thanks, Abiola. Right.